Stargate Worlds would have been an MMORPG based on the Stargate universe and was in development exclusively for PC between 2006 and 2009. Startup developer Cheyenne Mountain Entertainment, a name which itself referenced the show, created their own publisher in 2008 called FireSky. The game was initially planned for an early 2009 release. Stargate has had terrible luck when it comes to games. Some of you may have seen Stargate SG-1 The Alliance, a cancelled first and third person shooter that I absolutely gushed over in my episode on cancelled PS2 games. Stargate Worlds is another missed opportunity. I was researching this for an upcoming episode on cancelled PC games, but there's just so much information available that I thought it warranted its own dedicated video. And hopefully that will stop people moaning at me for banging on about Stargate. Just a warning for viewers, I'm going to assume some base knowledge of Stargate during this video rather than explaining all the terms.
Indeed.
First announced in January 2006 by rights holder MGM, Stargate Worlds would primarily be based on Stargate SG-1, being set in the Milky Way galaxy. Elements from other Stargate media like Atlantis would be present, and they even stated that content based on Stargate Atlantis may have emerged in the future as the first of several expansions. A massively multiplayer online role-playing game, the gameplay is a third-person action shooter which seems to rely heavily on utilising cover. It was made using Unreal Engine 3. Writers Robert C. Cooper and Brad Wright, the latter of whom co-developed Stargate for television, were on hand as consultants, so we know that the events of this game would have been as accurate as possible, as well as being officially considered canon. Being based on SG-1, the story would feature many familiar races and characters from the show. Of course, the core SG-1 team would be main characters, as well as the wider SGC team like General Hammond. Alien races such as the Goa'uld, Jafar and Asgard would also be main playable characters, and the writers planned to delve into and develop Stargate lore. One such planned broadening of the universe was the idea to expand on the backstory of the Furlings, an ancient race which the team never actually encounter in the Stargate TV shows. They were one of the alliance of 4 great ancient races, which consisted of the Furlings, Asgard, Nox and the Gate Builders, the Ancients. The game's story would also elaborate on this alliance and its eventual dissolution. Their aim with this was to capture the spirit of SG-1, but let the players take part in their own story and not be tied into specific events that had already happened on screen. The universe would be expanded upon not just in narrative, but with the elements found within it. The plethora of concept art shows a host of new stuff: fantastic beasts, vehicles, new weaponry, and even mechs. There are also quite a few new armour and clothing designs, some of which look absolutely fantastic. At launch, the game would feature 16 planets that could be visited via the Stargate network. Spaceships would be present in game, as we can see from the Goa'uld vessels here, but they wouldn't be player controlled. That's not to say they wouldn't be used as transport, but it was just stated that the primary means of interplanetary travel would be via Stargate. The Stargates were fully functioning, complete with DHDs, which the player would need to use by inputting the relevant gate address. The concept would see players forming squads formed of 7 different character classes called archetypes from 2 factions. One faction good, consisting of Asgard, Free Jafar and humans, and one bad, consisting of Goa'uld, Loyal Jafar and again humans. So basically SGC the good guys versus the System Lords as the baddies, with humans and Jafar loyal to each side. The classes would be Goa'uld, Jafar, Asgard and 4 human types: Soldier, Scientist, Archaeologist and Commando. Goa'uld would have the ability to command subordinates like Jafar, which is where their main strength would lie. They could also employ cloaking devices for stealth attacks.
They are indeed invisible.
Use powerful poisons, and employ a special attack which would summon ships to drop bombs on enemies. The Goa'uld symbiote would also be able to migrate to a new host, presumably if the current host became damaged, although this ability would come at a cost. One image from the concept art also shows a sarcophagus, so I wonder if this would have been used in game, giving Goa'uld characters regenerative abilities. Jafar would utilise their signature staff weapon both for ranged attacks and close quarters combat. Their strength came in numbers, with abilities that would bolster those of their allies. Asgard would be weak but technologically superior. Their main gimmick seems to be drones, which could attack, defend and even heal. Similar to the Goa'uld, they would have a special attack which would see ships bombard their enemies from orbit. And then the 4 human classes. Soldiers would be the bog standard SG team members or grunts, useful for defence when travelling through the gates. Their skills would revolve around standard weaponry like automatic weapons, grenades, rocket launchers and so on. Commandos would be the more special ops version of soldiers, using stealth rather than brute force. They would have the ability to set traps as well as disarm them, and use stealth weaponry like sniper rifles and C4. They would also have the ability to use technology to detect cloaked enemies. Scientists would be masters of technology, adapting tech to craft useful items including shields, turrets and healing items. Half scientist, half engineer, they would essentially be the Samantha Carter of the group. Archaeologists would be skilled in language, alien cultures, diplomacy and negotiation. Basically the Daniel Jackson role in the team. They could infiltrate alien civilizations to gather intelligence, blending in by using Asgard holographic technology to assume the appearance of the local inhabitants. Both the scientist and archaeologist types would also be able to solve puzzles, which would be presented as one of 6 minigames. We can see one such puzzle in the footage, which looks like that old chestnut, a good old hacking minigame. Each class would have a skill tree which can be upgraded and customised as the characters gain experience, advancing through 50 levels. This would grant them extra abilities. For example, the soldiers could learn to use alien weaponry in addition to Earth's projectile weapons. The tech trees would allow players to choose a branch to follow as they progressed, eventually specialising in selected fields. This would allow the player more control over their character's abilities, but also add another level of replayability. The classes each had their own backstory as well, based on elements and events from the first 6 seasons of SG-1. From this screen on Asgard Einar, it seems that the game would have a repository of information containing extensive files profiling main series characters. Each class would have their own starting area too. For example, when playing as a human on the evil faction side, the gameplay would start off with a prison break. The idea was to build a team that covered all bases, with an emphasis on teamwork. No single class could hope to emerge victorious, but with all the different classes working together with their respective skills, they could excel. The classes were different enough to afford players a wide variety of gameplay styles and strategies, but would all rely heavily on cooperative play. Players could team up with friends to form squads, or play solo as a squad leader commanding bots. The 2 factions, SGC and System Lords, would also be able to forge temporary alliances if necessary to take on greater mutual threats such as the Ori.
We should form an alliance.
The in-game heads-up display looks unusually complex. The circle in the centre is at its core a radar showing nearby enemies. The green bar to the left is your health, and the blue bar to the right is your battle focus. Battle focus would determine your rate of healing and how much damage you'd take. As I mentioned earlier, Stargate Worlds would promote the use of cover during battle. The radar in the centre shows you how effective your cover is at the time. Green indicates full cover, while yellow indicates partial colour, and the absence of colour means that you're fully exposed. There are a lot more icons and meters down at the bottom here, but I have no idea what most of these are. The red meter is your ammo, with the meter presumably showing the bullets in your current clip. Seems like an odd way to display it. As for the other icons, your guess is as good as mine. I assume that many of them are items and abilities which can be hotkeyed for quick use in combat. What we do know is that this heads-up display would be somewhat customizable, with tools that allowed you to add, remove and move the icons around. The various footage shows icons and meters in different places on screen and a different number of them. Players would even be able to save their custom configurations and share them with others online. The game's 16 planets are extensively laid out in concept art, ranging from Earth-like ancient ruins to dense and technologically advanced civilizations, and lush planets rich with alien flora and fauna. The Stargate Extended Universe would be expanded upon. For example, one of the worlds featured in-game was Lucia, the home planet of the Lucian Alliance, previously unseen. There were familiar surroundings too, of course. In the concept art we can see details of several areas of the SGC, including the gate room and the briefing room. So Stargate Command would likely play a big role and would perhaps act as a hub. Planets were a mix of old and new, with planets from the television series featuring in the game, like the Free Jafar Nation capital world of Dakara, the Tolan's new homeworld Talana, and what looks a lot like Abydos. Players would battle for control of these alien worlds, be it through direct combat or by ingratiating themselves with the local inhabitants by completing quests. Trade would also be possible within the planet's towns and cities. All of the player actions would affect the in-game universe as a whole. For example, local populations would switch allegiances based on their interactions with each faction. The distant worlds would also offer a wealth of opportunities for discovery through ancient mysteries and exploration. It was also suggested that the action would sometimes take place in outer space too. Now, when do the events of this game occur exactly? Where does it fit in the Stargate timeline? Well, I don't have a definitive answer for that because there seems to be a lot of conflicting information online. Some sources say it was early on in the SG-1 timeline, some say it was midway before Atlantis around seasons 4 to 8, and one source stated that it was to be set between seasons 8 and 9. But if any of these are true, why are the Ori present as enemies in the game? It doesn't add up. But we can agree that it was set sometime during the latter portion of SG-1. I'd say that of the varying claims online, between seasons 8 and 9 seems the most likely. What we do know from information that came to light in 2021 is the game's overarching plot would have involved the return of System Lord Ra. Ra was the first Goa'uld to ever feature in Stargate, having been the main antagonist in the 1994 feature film. This lends further credence to the idea that it was indeed Abydos in those screenshots. How they planned to explain his re-emergence is unknown, and I'm not sure I would have been entirely on board with that idea, to be honest, as Ra's death at the hands of O'Neill and gang had far-reaching implications in the television shows, and I think reversing that impact would diminish its significance somewhat. The idea was that one faction would be striving to thwart Ra's plans to return while the other sought to aid it. In addition to having Brad Wright and Robert C. Cooper on hand as consultants, Stargate Worlds would also have an authentic voice cast. The main 4 SG-1 team members, Richard Dean Anderson, Amanda Tapping, Michael Shanks and Christopher Judge,
Indeed,
would lend their voices to the cast, as well as several other SG-1 cast members. The audio's authenticity didn't end there. As the available gameplay footage shows, the sound effects were just as authentic too, be it the distinct whoosh of a staff weapon being fired, or the signature splash of a gate activation. In battle, these sound effects really bring the Stargate world to life. So what happened to Stargate Worlds? The issues began in late 2008 after the game had been in development for almost 3 years, when Cheyenne Mountain Entertainment started experiencing money issues. They started to seek further funding, but 2009 didn't see the situation get any better, and they were being sued over unpaid bills.
the situation has indeed worsened.
Eventually, Cheyenne Mountain filed for bankruptcy in early 2010 with a reported $10 million in debt. They formed a new studio called Dark Comet Games and developed a new game called Stargate Resistance, which was released online in 2010. It used many of the assets developed for Stargate Worlds. A third-person shooter, it had many of the same gameplay mechanics and the same or similar character classes. This time the story was set after the events of SG-1, with Samantha Carter being a general in charge of the Stargate program. Cheyenne Mountain shareholders sued them for theft of assets, which is absolutely understandable, to be honest. In late 2010, MGM decided not to renew the Stargate license for the game, so it was shut down in January of 2011. I can't help but feel that the demise of Stargate Worlds was a terrible loss for fans. Lead content designer on Stargate Worlds, Steve Garvin, said that the game would have filled a lot of gaps in SG-1 lore, and the showrunners agreed that what we had was pretty cool. The fans would have loved it, it was fan service. Hearing that makes the loss of this game even harder to swallow. It seems that we didn't just lose out on a potentially great game, but lost what would have been a significant expansion of the Stargate universe. A great shame indeed.
Indeed.
Thanks for watching. If you want to check out any other cancelled games videos, here's the playlist.